the Russian economy collapse in 2022. Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today in this video we will talk about Russian economy collapse in 2022. However, before we start our countdown, we would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and also press the bell icon. So, let's get started. The Russian economy is on the brink of collapse. For years, the country has been propped up by oil and gas exports, but now those revenue streams are drying up. The ruble has lost more than half of its value against the dollar, and inflation is soaring. The situation is so dire that even President Vladimir Putin has admitted that the economy is in serious trouble. So what caused this crisis, and what can be done to fix it? Predictions of an economic collapse. At the beginning of the war in Ukraine, French Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire predicted the collapse of the Russian economy under the effect of Western sanctions, before later retracting his words. At first, the sanctions seemed to be achieving their objective. Russian inflation rose rapidly, 16.7% in March year-over-year, then 17.8% in April, a 20-year record, due to the sharp depreciation of the ruble, which plunged to an all-time low. To support its currency, the Russian central bank then raised interest rates to 20%. Before lowering them to 17% in early April, aiming to curb inflation. Numerous images of Russian citizens racing to bank teller windows and ATMs to withdraw foreign currency have circulated on social media. The collapse of imports and private investment, coupled with the exodus of a number of foreign companies, has led to supply shortages in some industrial sectors, such as automotive production, which was quickly brought to a halt. Since May, Russia has even eased safety standards, allowing cars to be produced without ABS or airbags, due to shortages of electronic components and spare parts. In April, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, predicted the worst for the Russian economy, expecting inflation to exceed 20% and gross domestic product, GDP, to contract by 8.5% in 2022. Putin burning through reserves. The Yale researchers noted how Russia was drawing down the $600 billion in foreign currency reserves that have acted as a cushion for Putin in the first months of the war. They said $80 billion has already been utilized, while another half of the reserves has been frozen by the West. Alexander Mikhailov, associate professor in economics at the UK's University of Reading, believes that Putin will only run short of cash for the war when the West can fully cut its reliance on Russian energy, which he said would likely take another 2 to 3 years. If Putin's options become limited, Russia may effectively start printing money to meet skyrocketing military costs, which Mikhailov said would be madness, as it would lead to huge ruble depreciation, hyperinflation, and social unrest. Mironov, meanwhile, noted how Russians had experienced severe hardships under communism and in the 1990s. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, he cautioned against overestimating when the public would rise up against Putin. In the West, you have inflation of 10% and people are really scared and demand that politicians do something. Russian society doesn't work like that, so Putin has more leeway for the standard of living to decline by 20 to 30% without the risk of major resistance. Secondary sanctions would further isolate Putin. Many countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa have not imposed sanctions on Russia, with some benefiting from the West's retreat. Reports this week suggest that China is quietly selling its surplus Russian gas back to Europe. Pressure is now building for the West to impose so-called secondary sanctions where foreign nationals can be cut off from the international financial system if they do business with Russia. The measures were used to great effect by Washington against third parties to isolate Iran's oil exports and nuclear ambitions. China is the main country that ignores Western sanctions, along with Turkey and India, Langhammer told DW. A Chinese retreat from supporting Putin would be a major tailwind for the effectiveness of sanctions. Washington has previously said that secondary sanctions are an option, but experts urge patience because if they were introduced now they could further spike demand for oil and gas and prices would rise even more. The different types of economic systems. There are 3 different types of economic systems: planned, command, and market. Each system has strengths and weaknesses, and each is best suited for different types of societies. Planned economies are centrally controlled, with the government making all decisions about what will be produced and how it will be distributed. This can be an efficient way to use resources if the government is competent and well informed, but it can also lead to waste and inefficiency if the government makes poor decisions. Command economies are similar to planned economies, but instead of the government making all decisions, key industries are owned and operated by the state. This can lead to more efficient production in those industries, but it can also create a feeling of stagnation as innovation is stifled. Market economies are decentralized, with individuals and businesses making most decisions about production and exchange. This can lead to a more dynamic economy with more innovation and entrepreneurship, but it can also result in greater inequality as those who are more fortunate have greater opportunities to succeed. Russia held up better than expected. On the domestic market, Russia had already prepared well. Restrictions imposed as early as 2014 had transformed the economy, strengthening its autonomy in certain sectors and triggering the development of trade partners outside the spheres of Europe and America. For the banking sector, for example, the country developed its SPFS interbank communication system to compete with SWIFT, and created a national payment card system, MIR, in 2015. The result was that when 7 Russian banks were excluded from SWIFT in March and MasterCard and Visa suspended their operations in Russia, the public didn't suffer that much internally, said Mr. Tertry. The effects of the sanctions on the Russian economy were thus more limited than expected. The Bank of Russia has revised its forecast and anticipates a decline in GDP of 4.2% in 2022. And 1.8% in 2023, with growth recovering as early as the second half of the year. The IMF also updated its outlook in July, now expecting a 6% recession for 2022. To avert the threat of the ruble's collapse at the beginning of the war, the Russian authorities reacted quickly with capital control measures, which strengthened the currency's value. While the dollar was worth more than 80 rubles before the war began, it is now down to 58 rubles. Several control measures have been relaxed since the summer, without preventing the ruble from continuing its rise. Because of the effect of the sanctions, Russia imports very little and Russian businesses no longer use dollars or euros to obtain supplies abroad. What will happen to Russia after the collapse? The Russian economy is in a state of collapse. The ruble has lost over half of its value against the dollar, and prices for imported goods have skyrocketed. The country is facing hyperinflation, and its economy is expected to contract by as much as 4% this year. The Russian government has been forced to take drastic measures to try and stabilize the situation, including raising interest rates to 17% and introducing capital controls. But these measures are only temporary fixes that will do nothing to address the underlying problems with the Russian economy. So what happens next? Here are 4 possible scenarios for Russia after the collapse. Number 1. The government defaults on its debt and is forced to restructure its finances. This would be a disaster for the Russian people, as it would lead to even higher inflation and more economic hardship. Number 2. The government manages to avoid defaulting on its debt, but is unable to implement any meaningful reforms. The result is a prolonged period of stagnation, with little or no growth. Number 3. The government implements significant reforms and manages to get the economy back on track. This scenario is unlikely, given the current political climate in Russia, but it is not impossible. Number 4. The government does nothing and simply waits for oil prices to rebound. This would be the worst possible outcome, as it would mean years of economic decline with no end in sight. How will this affect the world economy? The Russian economy is in a state of collapse. The country is facing an economic crisis due to low oil prices, sanctions, and a weak ruble. This has led to high inflation, unemployment, and poverty. The economic crisis in Russia will have ripple effects throughout the world economy. Low oil prices will affect countries that are heavily dependent on oil exports, such as Venezuela and Nigeria. Sanctions will limit trade with Russia, and the weak ruble will make Russian products more expensive. This could lead to a global recession if the crisis is not contained. The economic crisis in Russia is a major concern for the global economy. Low oil prices, sanctions, and a weak ruble are causing high inflation, unemployment, and poverty. This could lead to a global recession if the crisis is not contained. The crisis in Russia is also having an effect on the stock market. Investors are selling off stocks and investing in safe haven assets, such as gold. This is causing the stock market to become more volatile. So this was our today's video. I hope you all like this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe my channel, and also share it with your friends and family. We will be back soon with a new video. Till then, keep supporting and take care.